All right, well, hey, buenas tardes, everybody. It's me, Profesor Cañado here, and I'm taking advantage of the break and the unpredictable weather we've had for the last few days. There's thunderstorms off toward the east. I think Indio, La Quinta, Palm Desert got hit pretty hard. It was pretty close here over the weekend. Dark clouds out by Lake Skinner, out toward Hemet, and in toward Riverside. You could hear the thunder off in the distance, but fortunately, nothing came over into this area. But that wasn't the case a couple of weeks, a few weeks ago. Last month, as I indicated in some of the announcements, where we had some thunderstorms sneak in here, and some were just hovering over. And I think I mentioned one of the announcements where there were some lightning bolts that struck right in the neighborhood. But fortunately, none of that stuff happened this time around. But it's still a bit unpredictable right now. So who knows if this is the end of it, or there's some stuff coming up soon. So before anything wild and crazy happens, whether it's thunder, lightning, or even earthquakes, there was a little earthquake out here about a week ago. I figure I better take advantage of the situation and record this video right now. All right. Well, listen, I want to go and talk a little bit more about the readings for this week, and of course we're now into the fourth week of the session. I want to go ahead and go over your topics for the week, and for this week we're now moving on to the 1930s, the Great Depression, era. We're going to see how Chicanos, Mexican Americans, essentially navigate through a lot of the challenges that they're facing during the times of the Great Depression, and a little before that, the 1920s. So that's what all of the readings are going to be analyzing over the course of the week. But to do that, instead of going off and starting with the Vargas reading, which has been pretty much the standard for the entire semester, let's take a different route, and I want you to go to and check out the film right off the bat. This is a film which A&E did about 20 years. That's when the A&E channel was more of a straight history, biography type of stuff. Of course, nowadays they have all the crazy Duck Dynasty guys or Deer Dynasty, whatever that show is called these days. And you can probably tell my house in the middle of the flight path. The little French Valley Airport is just down the road here, and when the planes come over, they make the turn toward the west, and then they land the airport right off of Highway 79. But getting back to the film, check out the film, and to watch the film, do the same process you did at the beginning of the session with the Gold Rush film. That is, you have to go to the Southwestern LRC database page, go to Films on Demand, and then once you get into Films on Demand, put in your information, your web advisor information, and then much like we did with the Gold Rush film, where you had to click titles and then type in Gold Rush. For this one, do the same thing, click titles, but type in Glass of the 20th Century, the 1930s. And so since you already knew the process from the Gold Rush film, you should have no trouble finding this one. And I modified the link in the here in the module, in the second part of the module, so you'll get to the LRC page with no problem. But even though this film isn't really about Chicano studies per se, I think the significance of the film is that it gives you a pretty good panorama of what life was like in the 1930s. Various celebrities from the era, many of whom have passed on in recent years, like Dick Clark of American Bandstand fame, also comedian Sid Caesar, one of the pioneers in comedy back in the 1950s. They talk about what life was like during the Great Depression. That is, all the trials and tribulations, the things that they couldn't do during those tough times when Franklin Roosevelt was the president. This is the era of the New Deal, and sadly, as we get more and more into the 21st century, that generation is gradually dying off and fading from the scene. My grandparents were from that generation, and my grandparents have been gone for a few years now. My grandmother 11 years, my grandfather 5 years. So when they were alive, they used to talk a lot about what they did during the Depression. My grandfather, my abuelito especially, he was from Texas, so he had a lot of tales of the 1930s and crisscrossing back and forth in his car. He had this he had this Model T in Texas, and then how he and some buddies from Texas, they were from the western part of Texas, from the Del Rio San Angelo era, said, "Let's go to California." Okay, let's go to California. So they did that. This was in the mid '30s. He did a lot of odd jobs in the 1930s, driving produce trucks, and then when the war started, he got involved in working on the airplanes. Worked in the home front. So a lot of stories like that. You don't hear too much about that anymore because, unfortunately, and reality is that these people are no longer on. Of course, case in point, Joan Rivers just passed away. She was just a child during the 1930s, but she too undoubtedly had a lot of memories of growing up in Brooklyn in the late 30s and then on into the early 40s. So again, check out the film. That's the first thing. You should look at right now. And then after the film, let's go ahead and move on to the Vargas reading. Vargas chapter 7. Vargas focuses in on the Great Depression. It was a tough time, of course, for all Americans, especially Chicanos. But what the Great Depression did was it led to a lot of early activism. So we talk about activism. Of course, Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta definitely come to mind. Gil Padilla, many of the other UFW leaders. But of course, Chavez and many of his generation were definitely influenced by what was going on in the 1930s. And one of the early influences for the Chicano activism was the work of Emma Tenayuca from Texas, from San Antonio. She was involved in many labor activities, and she's definitely, we can consider, one of the early Chicana pioneers. Not that is not just in terms of politics and labor movements, but I think on a cultural level as well. So the work of Emma Tenayuca, that's one of the main focuses of chapter 7. So the main point about all this is that this shows that Chicanas were not idle bystanders, as their husbands and brothers ostensibly were the ones who were the main movers and shakers, so to speak. The women were definitely at the forefront too, and Emma's story is definitely significant. You might say Emma was one of the early pioneers, early role models for people like Dolores Huerta and some of the other ladies who were involved in the UFW movement in the 1960s, and we're going to see a little bit more of a sense of how Chicanas were really active in organizing with the Salt of the Earth one that's coming up in the next couple of weeks. Okay, after you check out the Vargas reading, go on to the 1848 readings. First, the one by Abraham Hoffman and the one by Richard Garcia. Hoffman essentially picks up some of the themes we looked at from last week in terms of the 1920s and immigration issues. He talks about the people known as the restrictionists. They were among the first American policymakers, commentators, political writers in the newspapers and magazines back in those days who were saying, no, we can't have these Mexicans here, blah, 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 they're this, they're that. A lot of the stuff that, of course, has been going on in the 20th century into today with respect to negative views toward immigrant populations from not just Mexico, but, of course, from Central America. We know we saw quite a lot of all that crazy stuff happening over the summer. But Hoffman picks up upon that in some of the, you might say, the early roots, the early political and anti-Mexican sentiment that was really brewing in the 1920s, and then the events in the 1920s, of course, give you good context for what's happened in the 1930s, and that's where Garcia comes in. Garcia talks about, let me just shift my notes here. He talks about the development of the LULAC organization, the League of United Latin American Citizens, and in this case, Garcia is demonstrating that already early on, as the Mexican-American experience is unfolding in the early 20th century, you have a split between those who you might say have more of a pro-Mexico, pro-South sentiment versus those with a more pro-U.S. sentiment, a facing north type of idea. So pay attention to the terms facing north and facing south. Those are the key issues that Garcia gets into in his in his article in Beyond 1848. And then with respect to the readings, go ahead and also look at the PDF article by Gilbert Gonzalez, in which he talks about the so-called Mexican schools. That is, in many communities, you had the schools for the African Americans, for the Anglo Americans, and for the Mexicanos. My grandmother used to talk about how in National City there was a sense of that in the 1930s, that is, the blacks went to one school, the whites went to one school, and the Mexicanos went to another school. That's why my nana, my abuelita, she was from Mexico City, but she grew up in National City. She had a lot of first-hand knowledge of things happening in National City and the South Bay during the 1930s. Okay. Let's see. Oh, let's go ahead and wrap things up and look at another 1930s theme, and this is the issue of organizing and activism, but by means of art, by murals. And let's look at the 4-part series on the Diego Rivera murals that he did in Detroit in the early 1930s. It's a large program. The files are really big, so instead of putting it into one large program, it's in four parts, 4 bite-sized chunks, so to speak. So download all 4 parts. Check it out. Admire what Rivera was trying to do that is what all 4 walls represent, because the courtyard in the museum is very, very impressive. I've seen it many times, and it really overpowers you. And depending on the season, that is, whether it's the winter or the summer or the spring or the fall, the murals take on a different look when it's sunny or when it's cloudy and rainy. And of course, Detroit is notorious for some really wild and wacky weather. Every time you go there and look at it, you'll find something new and find something unique. And Rivera was a master of that. And I would say that while Rivera's done many masterpieces, whether it was in Mexico, in Mexico City, or the work he did in San Francisco, I would say that this is the peak. This is the hallmark. All these elements of either pro-labor or pro-capitalist ventures, depending on your point of view. If you're an industrialist, if you're, say, from the Henry Ford generation, Thomas Edison, those people, you'll say, well, this is a great work. Mr. Rivera has shown the grandeur of American know-how and technology and blah, blah, blah. But if you're a labor organizer and activist, you think, no, he's showing how the workers are they're unified. He's showing labor management themes going on. He's showing you just how evil and wicked the overseers are, and the workers are toiling on the assembly line. That is with the welding and the steel and all the smoke. And Rivera also has a lot of elements of other types of art styles too. Whether it's some of the work, whether it's a Cubist work or stuff that Picasso did in the early parts in the turn of the century period. So a lot of stuff to look at. So I think even with a PowerPoint program with the 4 parts, you'll get lost in understanding what the essence of all of it is. But I think the main takeaway from the mural is that what Rivera does is, I think he provides a template for later artists and activists to have these themes, whether it's cultural themes, economic themes, political themes, labor management issues, and he gives a template for artists, especially those in the 1960s and 1970s, as a model. So if any of you have seen some of the great stuff at Chicano Park, just below the Coronado Bay Bridge, I think you get a sense of Rivera's style, and also to a lesser extent with some of the other Mexican masters like David Alfaro Siqueiros and Jose Clemente Orozco, Rufino Tamayo, and to a lesser extent the more intimate work of Frida Kahlo, Diego's wife. What we find in the 1960s is that art, culture, music, folklore, these are very important elements in the Chicano experience, the Chicano movement. Cesar Chavez understood the value of having powerful art images and music and songs and corridos and acting and plays, actos, as Luis Valdez calls them with El Teatro Campesino. But I think Rivera and his generation provided the model for that, the template, the background, and I think all of those elements come together perfectly with the Detroit mural series, and so I can't replicate the entire experience with the PowerPoint program, but I hope I did enough of a good job to give you a sense of what Rivera was trying to accomplish. Okay, all right. So that covers this week's readings. Um, um, uh, See anything else I need to mention here? Other points? Nope. Okay, that's it. So that covers this week's reading. So we're moving on further and further. We're getting closer into the World War One, the mid 20th. I'm sorry, the World War Two, the mid 20th century, and then of course within the next few weeks we're going to get into the 1960s, 1970s, and the Chicano movement. So we're rapidly moving quickly, everybody. It's we're at the halfway point of the session. So hope you guys are hanging in there just fine. I've got plenty more videos for you on the next few weeks. So. So I got the recording fine before the weather turned crazy here. So you guys take care. Good luck. Have fun the rest of the week. Hope your semester is going well, and I'll see you guys again real soon. In fact, the next video I'm going to give to you within the next couple of days will be the EBSCO video, the EBSCO article. It'll be a video about the EBSCO article. So try saying that 10 times fast. Had a little bit too much coffee this morning, so it's kind of catching up right now. All right, everyone, take it easy, and the professor will come in and check in with you guys real soon.